Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to our second Insta Live. So this is the start of a tradition. So these sessions are meant to be partly educative, to try and help you, explain to you a little bit about how we make our champagne, and if you try and learn something, and also to provide some light entertainment during a rather tough time for everyone across the world, really, now unfortunately. I am Mathieu Billecart, and I'm the 7th generation of the Billecart family to have the privilege of leading Champagne Billecart-Salmon. Last week, we presented to you the cuvée Brut Rosé, which is possibly our best known cuvée. And this week we are presenting something, a cuvée which is rather less well known, and the cuvée Brut Sous Bois. And I'll tell you all about it. It's a rather special cuvée for Billecart-Salmon, and rather technical. Not many people can make these cuvées. Before we go into the history, some of you will have noticed that this is the one with the new, well, it's now a year old label, which is made entirely of wood. It's sustainably sourced cherry tree, to be accurate. It is real wood, but you will see it, the actual color and the shape, the things changes a little bit because it's a real slice of wood. So not every label is different to the one next to it. So that's the one. So we'll start with a little bit of history. So first thing first, some of you will know that actually for a long time, champagne was vinified in oak barrels. It's only really in the second part of the 20th century that new continent were used. So it got replaced by concrete, and actually in a greater way by stainless steel. And our house was one of the innovators in the 1960s and 70s and took on stainless steel in a big way. Why stainless steel? First, and certainly then, it was a lot more hygienic, a lot easier to clean. And also the second thing, it enables you to make wines that are more sort of fresher and more precise. However, about 25 years ago now, my predecessor, François, 5th generation of Billecart to lead the house, brought back barrel vinification. So it was in 1995 that we came back into it, because we recognize that whilst stainless steel provides freshness and precision, there is a touch in terms of taste that you cannot make in stainless steel. You need to make it in wood vinification. So we brought that back in the mid-90s. We started small, but it's now gone to, we are one of the largest owners of barrels in Champagne. We have over 400 Burgundian oak barrels who are over 15 years old now, and 26 8,000 liters footer. So we've certainly brought that expertise back in a big way. Stainless steel is still where the majority of the wines are vinified, but wood is used in a little bit in Brut Reserve, which is our base cuvée, the black label. It's used in Nicolas François, it's used in Louis Salmon, it's used in Claude Saint-Hilaire, which is a tiny cuvée, and in that one. And that one and the Claude Saint-Hilaire are the only one that are getting 100% oak barrel vinification. Right, then we got some questions about why is it called Brut Sous Bois. And believe me, it's hard to explain when you don't do it in French, so bear with me. In champagne and in winemaking, the mise sous bois is when you fill up your barrels. So you build barrels with a pump, but the actual, how you fill the very end of your barrels is manually. And to do that, with this process of where you actually complete the process of topping of the barrel, is called la mise sous bois. So this is where you ensure, certainly in our case, we don't want oxidized wines, so we ensure that the barrels are filled up to the very top, and that's called mise sous bois. And that's the reason why this cuvée is called Brut Sous Bois. It has been suggested to us that it's called Brut Sous Bois because it has aromas of forest and sous bois. It has indeed aromas of forest and sous bois, but it's not the reason why it's called Brut Sous Bois. It's a good guess, but this is not the actual reason. Then we move on to the sort of technical areas. I know a number of you on that list here are wine specialists or champagne specialists. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how it's made. it's hard and easy to remember. So the blend is a third of each of the main grapes in Champagne. So it's a third of Chardonnay from Côte des Blancs, so Grand Cru Chardonnay, Chouilly, Avize, Ménil, Cramont are the main villages we play in. A third Pinot Noir from Montagne de Reims, and a third Meunier, a couple of villages next to Épinay. What's perhaps more specific about Brut Sous Bois is there is great amount of care that goes into actual selecting specific parcels that will go and be vinified into the barrels. Some of that is a selection because we know that these barrels over the last 20-25 years have always been more likely to end up in the shade. But there is a test that we make during the harvest that the winemakers and ourselves taste the actual grapes and ensure that they have the ripeness and the structure that we think are well suited for wood vinification. It's very important because we don't want the wood to overpower the wine, and it's important then to pick up parcels that have strong character. And this is the first part of the Brut Sous Bois care, and I'll come back to that. It's a non-vintage champagne, so that means multiple years are used for its preparation. And about a third of that cuvée is reserve wine. It will vary from one cuvée to the next, but broadly it's about a third, of which some of that is a Solera system. So we'll have multiple years kept into barrels. And what that means is you can easily get 6 or 7 different years into a Brut Sous Bois bottle, in addition to its long aging. So you'll have 6 or 7 different harvests very easily into a cuvée. In terms of method for the vinification, our alcoholic fermentation is done at cold temperature. I think a number of you know that's the signature of Billecart-Salmon. But however, we get that cold fermentation done differently in oak barrels that we would in stainless steel tanks. The reason for it is in stainless steel, we're able to thermoregulate every tank individually. In barrels, you're not able to do that. The barrels are too small. The 228 liters, that's big, but that's too small to have a thermal regulation system in it. The food are different. So what we do is we bring the temperature of the chai, so the temperature of the room where the barrels are. It's one big room for those of you that visited. We bring the temperature of the chai down to around 9 to 10 degrees. And by doing so, we know that we bring the temperature of the mou and the wine around 13 degrees Celsius. And thereby, what that means is we slow the fermentation process, much in the same way as we do it in stainless steel tank. And we slow that fermentation process so that we extract more finesse and elegance that when other people do it quicker. But we have less pressure being family owned on timing, so we focus on quality instead of churning the estate faster. Question about Solera, it could be about 20% of the total. So it can be quite significant, it will depend from one year to the next, but about 20. So that's for the alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation, then we do a soutirage, so we empty the tanks around March, April, so they've been emptied this year. So it's fermentation and a short élevage. Why not longer? Because we don't want the wood to overpower the wine. We think within 6 months the wines gain enough of the characteristic without being overpowered. So about 6 months élevage. And for this cuvée, typically we don't make the malolactic fermentation. Very rare we do. We want to keep as much tension in that wine as possible. First, because we've selected the parcels that can cope with it, and also and the aging in the bottle is much longer. So it's important for wine aging to keep a very strong backbone, and we don't want to lose the malic acid. We want to keep it and preserve it, and over time it will mellow. So that's it. Tanks are emptied. We put that into a tank very briefly, and then we put that into a bottle. So that gets bottled pre-summer. And then this cuvée would spend easily, minimum of 5 to 6 years on the lees. And actually the cuvées we released, the last batch has got 10 years on lees. So this is a very long aging. It's a non-vintage champagne that is older than the vast majority of the vintage cuvées on the market. Not the Billecart ones, but if you look at all the prestige cuvées out there, a number of them will be 2012 and some of them older. This is 10 base. So it's got 10, 9, 8 in a big way, and then it'll have a Solera system. So this is old wine, but it's been selected knowing that it will end up that way. So long aging for a non-vintage champagne. Sorry. For disgorgement, so a traditional way, and the dosage is around 7 grams. Told you Brut is between 7 and 13. On the 7 and 13, this is at the lower end of Brut, but 7 grams, and then we ship it 6 months after dosage. So that's on the method. In terms of spirit and the philosophy, what's very important, and we'll come to the tasting in a minute, is while it's called Sous Bois, we don't want that wine to be overly oaky. And that's a real challenge. That is a real challenge in making that wine. Some of the champagnes are very oaky, and some people love it, and that's absolutely fine. But to keep it in the Billecart way, it has to have finesse, elegance, and balance. But it is finesse, elegance, and balance for a wine that's vinified in oak barrels. The way we do that is based on this sort of magic triangle to get the balance, and it sort of rests on 3 principles. The first thing is the selection of the parcels I talked to you about. So we know which parcels are going to be able to cope with that wood vinification without being overpowered. That's the first point. The second thing is we use old barrels. So our barrels are on average 15 years old. Why is that important? When the barrels are old enough, they're not at a stage where they're going to release a lot of enzyme that are going to make the wine oaky or feel like vanilla. When the barrels are old, what we want from them is a micro-oxidation, okay? And we get that by having these old barrels. We want the micro-oxidation and the texture that it gives to the wine, but we don't want it to feel oaky. And the third principle is the long aging. Selective parcel, old barrels, long aging. Because even when you vinify in oak barrels and you taste the base wine, you will see quite a strong difference. But over time, the wood part will fade, and what you will gain is richness, structure, and texture in the wine. And that's really what we want. So that method is just the result of all our sort of trial and error in how to make that cuvée work and be within the Billecart style whilst being vinified in oak. Otherwise we would have called it Sous Bois and would have put a wood label on it. That's a techie bit. Okay, tasting. Let's open that bottle first. I won't go through the technique again. The 2 principles, and try and make sure you don't hurt anybody. So don't try and point in the eye of your neighbor, unless you really don't like it, but even then. And the second principle, which is key, is twist the bottle and not the cork. So, there you go. Let's see if it works. There you go. For this week, I've chosen a white flute, or what really could be called a white wine glass. I think we talked about that last week. We can come back to it in the questions if you like, but really the characteristic of that wine are such that I really recommend you use, or at least you try once, the white wine glass or the very broad fruit, because that's quite for a wine that's quite old right now, and it needs time to sort of explain itself. So either you're going to be really patient looking at a narrow glass, but I'm not a really patient man, so I'm more likely to have a broad glass and drink it quickly. Okay? So tasting. Tasting, always difficult to see in the video, but I'll try and see whether I can do that here. You see? That's quite a deep yellow. That is quite a deep yellow. Why is it a deep yellow? 2/3 of the grapes are black grapes, but more importantly, the long aging. This is an old wine, relatively speaking, and therefore you're gonna get a more sustained yellow. Hopefully you can see there, which is normally a good sign. It's normally a very good sign that you have something, especially when the nose match up. So let's see. On the nose, the first thing you notice, particularly if you're used to drinking other Billecart cuvée, is this smells very different. and it should smell very different because this is the only cuvée with Clos Saint-Hilaire that's 100% oak barrels. Other houses, you know, the likes of Krug and others are known for just that. So you're more likely to end up in that territory, a Giraud, an Alfred Gracien, a Jackson, than perhaps what you've been used to when you drink wine made in stainless steel. But that's largely the barrel vinification, and what that gives you is the toastiness, the slight. This is our most oxidative cuvée, other than Clos Saint-Hilaire, but it's sort of the toastiness, the butteriness that you get, but it doesn't smell oaky. It smells rich. It smells like you have something in your glass that's big, and that's amplified by the fact that it's a big glass, and I didn't put a little bit in it. I put a proper glass. And then in the actual taste, well, let's see. But so, first thing you know is Billecart is the bubbles. Bubbles, very light. They caress your palate. They're not aggressive. They're very small. However, you know it's Sous Bois because while it has a finesse and elegance for a wine which is vinified in oak barrels, it has a lot of structure and a lot of power, right? You are in a non-vintage cuvée. You are not in Nicolas François, you're not in Clos Saint-Hilaire, but you're already there into quite a powerful wine. So, what do you call it? I think it's is it a steel hand with a velvet glove, right? That's basically it. The velvet glove is Billecart, but that's the Sous Bois steel hand, which is very, 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 very marked here. Not the oakiness, there's just structure. You know you're gonna get a lot of Grand Cru there. You know you're gonna get the right parcels and the long aging, and then you end up effectively in something that you might not expect for a non-vintage, but you will expect in a prestige cuvée. We have other prestige cuvées that are more on the finesse side, but that one is just it has the finesse and elegance, but also the structure and the power. And that sort of leaves us to the point about sort of best tasting experience. So. We asked you for a few suggestions. Champagnac, I don't know whether he's on, he was there for the French session, said my best pairing for a bottle of Brut Sous Bois is another bottle of Brut Sous Bois. Can't beat it. That was the best suggestion so far. Other than that, the second best suggestion, or certainly mine, is I love this champagne with cheese. I really like it with an 18 months or 24 months old Comté. On a Friday night, you get home, you only need to get the cheese out of the fridge, you slice it, and you have that with that wine, and that's perfect. And it's perfect for me because it cut through the fattiness of the cheese, doesn't need cooking, cut through the fattiness of the out of the cheese without overpowering the cheese. You know, in food and wine pairing, like in winemaking, the key is balance. People tend to forget that. People want, at the moment always, people want extremes. I think finding balance is the key. Blending is good. You have to work very hard to get to that balance. Duck, I think it works great. I was going to come on to it. Poultry, chicken, roast chicken, stuffed turkey. That works really, really well. Works really well. The other ones that it loves, less of the moment, is mushrooms. Mushrooms, lovely. Giraud platter, and this is a killer. We had a suggestion of mushroom risotto with scallops and truffle. Wonderful. Le verre, yes, so mushrooms, all of this, really, really likes it. So it's a foodie wine. We have wines that are lighter, easier, Brut Sous Bois, Blanc de Blanc, an extra Brut, etc. That one, more foodie wine without hitting the top cuvées. Right, well that's pretty much it. We got a lot of questions, so I was proposing to cover some of those. We're not going to be able to cover all of them because we got quite a lot, but I try and answer most of them. We got a question on how much, how long you can keep that cuvée. All our champagne you can keep. The rosé is the one where you're going to lose the fruitiness, and I told you that last week, but this ages beautifully. Really, really beautifully. It is a non-vintage, but out of all the non-vintages, I think it's worth an experiment to keep that. we got a question from CB97 who was asking us about, so what was the reason, what was the inspiration for Brut Sous Bois? Inspiration for Brut Sous Bois, and it's a general philosophy at Billecart. Our family ethos is give priority to quality, strive for excellence. Right, so that's the headline. What that means is we, the team, the tasting committee, are constantly challenging them, and we challenge ourselves on how we can make better wines. You know, if you ask the team, this is the question I ask them all the time. And what that means is we experiment quite a lot. So we experiment in the vineyard management, we experiment in vinification, and from time to time we will bottle new things just to try and see how it evolves. Sometimes it will help us get better at existing cuvées, and sometimes we will just change, we will just potentially create new cuvées or limited edition or things like that. That one really is a result of when we grew in capacity with barrels. We started trying bottling on their own wine that have been made in barrels, like the Clos Saint-Hilaire, but we couldn't make Clos Saint-Hilaire out of other places other than the Clos Saint-Hilaire. And that was a successful experiment. We could see that that wine was very different to all the other cuvées that we had. We could see that it was one of the best in class compared to other people that were making it, or at least it was complementary. It was not copying others. It was something very different to others. And that's the reason why we kept it. So experimenting and striving for excellence leads us to sometimes decide that actually, yes, it's great. I think it's something new. People will like it. A number of you always ask us, why don't you make 100% this? Why don't you try this? We can't make all of it, but on that time we felt we could put the Billecart name on it, and that's not something we do lightly. The question about aging are answered. Major difference between this. Here was with this question. 100% Pinot Meunier next. I watch this space maybe. Question: difference between Brut Reserve and Brut Sous Bois. Brut Reserve, which is the black label and silver writing. Brut Reserve gets about it got 7% this year of wine vinified in oak, where that one is 100%. So that's the main difference, and that has longer aging. But on the whole, and it gets stainless steel. That's really the main difference. You're making me thirsty now. Other question: what inspired from C London 2012? What inspired the redesign of the label? So it is from this. This is the third label on this cuvée. Some of you will remember the swirled version, the very first one. And then briefly we used sort of dark brown cuvée when we reshaped some of our labels in beginning of 2018. And you know that there was nothing wrong with that label. However, that wine is served by the glass at a luxury hotel in Paris, and the sommelier there is a best sommelier of France, so is a great taster. And he gave me that comment, which I thought was very constructive. I won't name him here. I think he'll recognize himself, but that whilst the cuvée, the label of 2018 was very nice, it wasn't sufficiently distinctive, and people missed the previous one. Now that happens all the time when you change label. However, it is very important to listen to people's constructive feedback, and we had toyed with the idea of doing wood labels before, but we couldn't make them from sustainably sourced places. We hadn't found a way, and around the time he gave us that comment, around the summer of around 2018, we found a way to source it from sustainably managed forest. So that was really the trigger for us to then we found a way of doing it in a sustainable way. It's cherry-free, it all works, so we rechanged that label. The wine inside, if you get the brown label, it is a 2011 base. That's back to a 2010 base. But fundamentally, the wines haven't changed, just the label. Impact of the crisis on Champagne. We were meant to entertain you, but we'll be serious for a second. Look, there are a few things. So, for vineyard, it has no impact. The virus doesn't touch the vines. So from that perspective, there is no change to all the work we're doing upstream, vineyard management, the pruning and the tying and all of that, and the work we're doing to control how the growth of the plant, all of that. That's still working. What is not working is obviously, we don't do supermarkets. We focus on hotels, restaurants, and independent wine merchants, and they are suffering, and therefore we are suffering with them. That's basically the shortcut. We stay close to them. We are praying for the recovery sooner rather than later. We are a family business. We've been together for 202 years. We've seen the world wars. We've seen the crisis. We've seen the 29 crisis and others. So we'll see through that one. But we really want to try and help our clients wherever we can, and we hope that lockdown period won't last long and people will come back and party safely, but party nonetheless. You can party at home, and a number of independent wine merchants are still open, so help them if you can. If I was gonna have a glass of champagne with somebody dead or alive, who could that be? I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Look, if they're alive, then I've probably done it. I don't have great aspiration to meet people. If they're really important to me, my friends and family, and I spend the time I need with them, so I'm very lucky. If somebody dead, I wouldn't mind having this cuvée or others with my great-great-great-grandfather, Nicolas François Billecart, who did my job 200 years ago. I'll be keen to understand and get his perspective on what our family business has become. Top tips: he was a brave man to launch a champagne business from when he was starting in 1818 was no mean feat. So if I could have a glass with somebody, I'd like to have a glass with him, because I wouldn't be speaking to you today if it wasn't for the creation of the house. So we owe him a lot.